All right, so welcome to another deep dive, everybody. And today, oh boy, we're tackling AI regulation. It's a big one, right?
Yeah.
We've got this article from Noble magazine and a Q&A that really, I think, sort of lays out what different governments are doing all over the world to, like, keep up with this technology. You know, because it's moving so fast.
It is.
I feel like every day there's some new headline about AI, like doing some crazy thing.
Yeah, it's changing everything, really.
It's both amazing and also kind of terrifying, right?
Absolutely, it is. It's, I mean, it's like this incredible power, but it's also like, we want to harness the power, but we want to make sure that we're, not creating some kind of Skynet situation.
Exactly, yeah. So the Knowable magazine article, it kind of categorizes the threats from AI in a really interesting way.
Right.
They talk about threats to democracy and then, like, existential threats.
Yeah, the existential threat category is where it gets, really interesting, I think.
Yeah, I know. I mean, they make the case that these threats aren't just, like, theoretical. Like, AI could really disrupt everything from elections to, the future of humanity itself.
Yeah, I mean, it's very possible, and I think the article makes a really good case for that. And what's challenging about AI, I think, compared to other technologies, is that it's so unpredictable, right?
Right.
We're dealing with like complex systems that learn and adapt, and we don't always understand how that's all working. So it's kind of like
dealing with an alien intelligence. I think I've read that somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great analogy because it really captures the essence of it. Like with AI, we don't necessarily know how it's going to behave or what unintended consequences might be.
Right. Okay, so let's say this alien intelligence, like, really does get out of control. What are some of the real-world scenarios that, like, keep AI experts up at night?
Well, I mean, one that comes to mind right away is AI-powered misinformation campaigns.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine AI systems that are able to generate like incredibly realistic fake news or videos, that could spread like wildfire online. And you could just imagine what that would do. I mean, to trust in institutions, just, chaos in society.
Yeah, wow.
And this isn't just hypothetical, by the way.
Right.
We're already seeing AI being used, in a way that's manipulating public opinion.
That's disturbing. And the article, it mentions AI-driven warfare as another big concern, right?
Right.
Like AI controlling weapon systems and making, like, life or death decisions without, any human intervention.
Yeah, and that brings up a whole bunch of like ethical and practical dilemmas, right? Like, how do we make sure that AI weapons comply with international law? And how do we prevent, unintended casualties? How do we prevent AI from falling into the wrong hands? These are questions we need to be asking, like, right now.
It can be a little overwhelming when you start thinking about all of it, right?
It is.
But okay, I mean, governments are at least starting to take this seriously.
Yeah.
So, like, what's the U.S. doing? What's their approach to AI regulation?
Well, the U.S., I mean, there has been some back and forth, with AI policy. Like in 2023, Biden signed an executive order on AI safety, focused on setting standards, protecting privacy, that sort of thing.
Right.
Which was a big step towards actually having some guardrails,
But then the article mentions that executive order got overturned when President Trump, came back into office.
Yeah, well, the article takes place in 2025, right? So it's a little bit in the future.
Oh, right.
And it was highlight those political challenges. Like, it's not always clear how much intervention is appropriate, and whether regulations might stifle innovation. There's a lot of debate about all of that. And there's also the AI Safety Institute, which Biden set up. But its future under this new administration is, kind of up in the air.
Okay, so executive orders can be reversed, administrations change. It seems like we need something more solid, right? What about actual laws? Are there any laws being passed to regulate AI?
Well, that's where it gets really complicated, I think. One of the fundamental challenges is like establishing that humans have rights, but algorithms don't.
Right.
Which is especially important when we're talking about like online platforms, and the role of AI in shaping like what we see.
Well, yeah, that's a whole other can of worms, right? The article talks about this kind of gray area with free speech online.
Yeah.
Apparently, like the Supreme Court, they initially saw online platforms as just like carriers of information, but then they upheld that ban on TikTok. So, which seems, contradictory.
The article's point there is that older viewpoint doesn't really account for how these AI algorithms, are actually shaping things. It's not just like neutral platforms anymore. These algorithms are designed to maximize engagement, and that often means they end up prioritizing like outrageous content or things that'll get people riled up, even if it's harmful,
Yeah.
We have to find a way to hold these companies accountable for how those algorithms that they create are affecting us.
Yeah, that makes sense. So is anyone like in Congress trying to address this whole algorithm problem?
One big thing they're focusing on is repealing Section 230, which basically shields online platforms from being liable for content posted by their users.
Okay, remind me, why does that matter for AI?
Well, think about it. If Section 230 is repealed, platformer might actually be held liable for harm caused by AI-generated content, that's on their sites.
Ooh.
That would be a huge shift in how we think about responsibility, right? For the stuff they host.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting to see the connection. So repealing Section 230 could force those platforms to like really crack down on AI-generated stuff. What else is in the works in terms of legislation?
Well, there are a couple other interesting proposals out there. The Algorithmic Accountability Act, for one, would require companies to assess their AI systems for bias, discrimination, stuff like that.
Right.
And then you've got the Deepfakes Accountability Act, which is about regulating the creation and use of deepfakes.
Yeah, those deepfakes are getting really good. It's kind of scary.
Oh, they are. Yeah. And then there's the Future of Artificial Intelligence Innovation Act, which is about encouraging research into AI and its effects on the economy, workforce, and national security, that kind of thing.
Okay, so there are ideas out there, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Let's hope Congress can actually, make something happen before AI truly goes off the rails.
Yeah.
But, the article points out that the U.S. isn't really leading the way when it comes to regulating AI, right?
Right. I mean, the European Union has actually been much more proactive. They've already put some pretty interesting regulations in place that are worth looking at.
Okay, perfect. Let's dive into that right after we hear from our announcer. All right, so we're back, and still diving deep into this whole AI regulation thing. Before the break, we were just starting to talk about how the EU's handling all this.
Yeah.
And they seem to be, way ahead of us, right, in terms of putting actual rules in place.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, they've really taken a much more comprehensive approach to AI governance, really focusing on protecting those fundamental rights and ethical development, making sure it's all done responsibly.
Yeah, the article even calls them trailblazers, which honestly kind of makes the U.S. look a little bit, I don't know, slow, maybe?
Yeah.
So give us the details. What are some of those key regulations that they've actually gone ahead and implemented over there?
Okay, so one of the most significant one is this thing called the EU Artificial Intelligence Act, which is pretty interesting. Basically, it categorizes AI systems based on risk level, right?
Oh, okay.
So the higher risk systems, like the ones used in healthcare, or law enforcement, they're going to face a lot more scrutiny than, say, your typical spam filter.
Okay, so it's not just like a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
No, definitely not. They're being very specific about it.
What else have they got going on?
Well, there's also the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act. These are designed to prevent those big online platforms from doing anything shady, anti-competitive behavior, and also making sure they take responsibility for the content that they're hosting.
Makes sense.
And of course, we can't forget about GDPR, right? The General Data Protection Regulation. That one was a game changer for online privacy.
Oh, yeah, GDPR. I remember when that came out. It caused quite a stir, didn't it?
It did, yeah.
But overall, it seems like, it was the right direction to go in, giving people more control over their own information.
Definitely. And what's interesting is the EU's approach is actually starting to influence other parts of the world. Like California now has its own version of GDPR, the California Consumer Privacy Act.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so you can really see the EU setting a precedent here.
It makes you wonder if the U.S. will eventually feel the pressure to follow suit,
Yeah.
Especially if companies have to deal with all these different regulations all over the place.
Right.
It might just be simpler for everybody if there were I don't know, some global standards, right?
Well, yeah, and that raises a really important question. Do we need some kind of international cooperation on this whole AI governance thing?
Right.
Should there be some kind of global treaty for AI?
Whoa, that's a big idea, isn't it? I mean, wouldn't that be insanely hard to actually pull off with all the different political systems, and priorities around the world?
It would definitely be challenging, yeah. I mean, look at climate change, right?
Right, exactly.
We can't even seem to agree on that, and that's a pretty big existential threat, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, no kidding.
But the article really points out this tension that exists between democratic countries like the US and the EU, which focus on individual rights and freedoms, and more authoritarian places like China, which have a different approach.
Yeah, they mentioned how China has a totally different philosophy about AI, something about utilitarian ethics.
Right, exactly. In China, it's all about the collective good, not so much about individual rights. So their government has a much more hands-on approach to AI, development and regulation. They really see AI as a tool for, pushing the country forward and for maintaining social control.
So they're not super worried about things like privacy or free speech when it comes to AI.
Not as much, no. They actually have rules that say AI systems have to, promote socialist values and prevent the spread of anything that could be seen as undermining national unity.
Wow.
They also have a super close relationship between the government and tech companies, so there isn't a ton of pushback against government control. And, I mean, their social scoring system, that's a pretty clear example of how they use technology for surveillance and control.
It's like a whole different world over there. So if democracies and these authoritarian regimes have such totally different ideas about AI, like how can we even have a productive conversation about global governance?
It's a huge challenge, for sure. The article suggests something they call a dual-track approach. So democratic countries, they would work together to establish those norms and standards that, align with their values. But at the same time, they would also engage with these non-democratic countries to try and address those shared concerns, like, preventing AI warfare, that kind of thing.
Okay, I can see how that might work. Finding that common ground where we can, even if we don't agree on the bigger picture, right?
Yeah, exactly. We might be able to reach some agreements on things like, limiting autonomous weapons or maybe setting up some protocol for using AI responsibly in like critical infrastructure. Those are things we could probably agree on.
Right.
And even if those agreements aren't perfect, at least they could help us to avoid those worst case scenarios.
I'm glad they offered some actual steps.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to get lost in all those hypotheticals and feel like it's all too big to handle. But let's bring it back to the U.S. for a second. We were talking about that political divide over AI regulation earlier. Do you think that's going to be a big roadblock to progress?
Oh, it definitely could be, yeah. You've got those who think the government should just like stay out of it entirely and let the market drive innovation. And then you've got others who are saying we need strict regulations to protect everybody. So finding middle ground, that's going to be key.
It's that classic debate, innovation versus regulation.
Right.
But with AI, it feels like the stakes are just so much higher.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about a technology that could totally reshape our society. So we need to be really careful about, steering it in the right direction.
This is all getting very, I don't know, philosophical and honestly a little overwhelming. So let's get back to the specifics for a minute. What are some of the ethical dilemmas that AI is already, bringing up?
We touched on a couple already, like AI bias and how it's going to affect jobs, but there are so many more. Like, how do we make sure that AI is used fairly? How do we prevent it from being used for, surveillance and control? These are questions that we really need to be asking.
Yeah, big questions. And the article also mentions the whole AI sentience thing.
Right.
What if AI actually becomes conscious? Do we owe those AI entities any kind of rights? I mean, should we even be thinking about that?
Now we're getting into deep philosophical waters, right? It might sound like science fiction, but it's something we're probably going to have to deal with sooner or later. And it really makes you question, what does it even mean to be human?
It's like we're at the beginning of a whole new chapter, and we don't even know the rules of the game yet.
Yeah, it's like we're writing the rule book as we go along,
Well, I got to say, I'm glad that people like you are thinking about this stuff and, trying to guide us through all of it.
Well, it takes all of us. We need folks from all different fields, computer science, ethics, policymakers, philosophers, you name it. We all need to be working together to make sure that AI helps us, not the other way around.
Right. That makes sense. Okay, folks, we've covered a lot. I don't know about you, but I need a minute to process all of this. But don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more on this honestly mind-blowing world of AI regulation. Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. I got to say, that last segment, I think we need a minute to process all this.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, but it really is a lot to wrap your head around.
It's true. We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? Like killer response, conscious AI, what the EU's doing, China's doing things so differently.
Right.
But maybe now's a good time to really zone in on some of those ethical challenges that AI is bringing up, in a practical sense.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea because honestly, my brain's still buzzing from that whole AI sentience discussion.
Yeah.
Like 1 minute we're talking about algorithms that write haikus, and then it's like, oh, are we going to give digital beings rights?
I know. It's crazy, right?
It is crazy.
I think that's exactly why we need to be having these conversations now, though,
Right.
While AI is still relatively young, because once this technology gets really advanced, once it's woven into our lives, it's going to be a lot harder to, undo things.
You can't put the genie back in the bottle.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's get into some of those more practical ethical dilemmas. The article talks about AI bias and how that's a big concern. Can you break that down a little bit? But like, what does that actually mean and why is it such a big deal?
Okay, so AI systems, they learn from the data that we feed them, right?
Right.
And if that data reflects, the biases that already exist in society, then guess what? The AI is going to learn those biases too.
Yeah.
It's going to bake them right into its decision making.
So like if we train AI with data that's already skewed against certain groups of people,
Yeah.
it's just going to perpetuate the problem.
Exactly. And we're already seeing this play out, like facial recognition systems that are less accurate for people of color, or like hiring algorithms that discriminate against women. It's like we're building the bias right into the code.
It's kind of terrifying, isn't it? It's like we're creating these super powerful tools, but they could actually make things worse, make inequality even worse.
Yeah.
So like, how do we stop that from happening?
Well, I think it's going to take a multifaceted approach, really. For starters, we need more diversity in the teams that are actually developing AI, right? If you have more people from different backgrounds, different perspectives involved in that design process, well, you're more likely to catch those biases, before they cause any real harm.
It's like they say, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right?
Exactly, exactly. We also need a lot more transparency about how these algorithms are created,
right,
how they're trained. If companies have to reveal their data sets and explain their logic, it'll be a lot easier to spot and fix those biases.
Transparency seems to be like a really big theme here, right?
Yeah.
The more light we can shine on these processes, the better.
I think that's a great point. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, or so they say.
Now, the article also touched on the impact of AI on jobs. And I know that's something a lot of people are really worried about. I mean, some experts are predicting that AI could automate away millions of jobs. What do you think about that?
I think it's a very valid concern, for sure. I mean, yes, AI will create jobs. It'll create new jobs, new industries. But it's also going to replace a lot of existing jobs. The big question is, will those new jobs, will they be enough to make up for the losses? Will people be able to access those jobs,
So it's not just about numbers, right? It's about quality and access. Are we going to end up with this tiny elite who control the whole AI-powered economy?
It's possible, yeah, and it's definitely something we should be thinking about very carefully. Some folks are talking about things like universal basic income as a way to address it, but it's complex. There's no easy fix.
Man, it feels like we've barely scratched the surface of this whole AI ethics thing.
Yeah.
It's a lot of tough questions for us to answer as a society.
Absolutely. But the good news is, I think we're finally starting to ask those questions. We're starting to see the potential, both good and bad.
Right.
And that's the first step, right, to making sure that we use this technology responsibly and ethically.
So what's the main takeaway you want our listeners to, really think about after this?
I think the most important thing to remember is the future of AI isn't set in stone. We have a say in this,
Yeah.
The choices we make now, those are going to shape the world of tomorrow. So stay informed, stay engaged, and demand that AI is used to benefit all of us.
I love that. That's a great way to put it. This has been a truly mind-opening deep dive into AI regulation. I want to thank our expert for walking us through all of this.
You're welcome.
And to everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us on this journey. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into another topic. It'll hopefully get you thinking and keep you curious. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep learning.